Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I will give you just a few moments to connect to audio. Welcome to this first Friday lecture. Give you just another moment or so. All right. Well, that seems like long enough. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this first Friday lecture for the month of May 2025. Our speaker today is basic program instructor Clare Pearson. Clare's lecture is entitled Dostoevsky and the Problem of Evil. This basic program First Friday lecture is supported by the Anastopoulos Lecture Series Fund in memory of basic program instructor George Anastopoulos. My name is Noah Shafetz. I am the Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the basic program. Please note that this presentation is being recorded so that we can make it available on the Graham School YouTube channel. During the lecture and during the question and answer period that follows it, you will not be able to unmute your microphones, but we invite you to enter questions for Claire in the Zoom chat box at any time during today's event. Claire will have a chance to respond to your questions after her lecture. I will write them down and put them to Claire after her lecture is finished. During the lecture, Claire and I will be able to see only a handful of your video feeds at one time, so you may choose to leave your video on or turn it off at your discretion. Claire's video will be spotlighted, so the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. I recommend that you do that now. Before I give Claire a full introduction, let me tell you a little bit about the basic program and the Graham School of Continuing Liberal and Professional Studies at the University of Chicago. Along with the basic program, the Graham School offers an array of programming across the liberal arts, including our Masters of Liberal Arts program and our open enrollment courses, as well as a number of events and travel study opportunities. Since 1946, the basic program has provided our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum dedicated to direct engagement with original texts. At the heart of the basic program is our 4-year core sequence, which offers firsthand encounters with some of the greatest works of the classical and Western traditions in a community of adult learners and in courses taught by experienced instructors who are trained in the Socratic method of leading discussion. Registration for our summer and fall quarters is ongoing, and our sections have a tendency to fill up quickly, so I recommend that if you have not done so already, you reserve your spots in courses for the summer and fall as soon as you can. Our next First Friday lecture will take place on June 6th. Our speaker will be the basic program's Claudia Trout Distinguished Instructor, Amy Thomas Elder. And the title of Amy's lecture will be Radical Evil from Kant to Nuclearism. You can see a theme between this lecture and the next one. Evil is on our minds at the moment, it seems. Today's speaker, Clare Pearson, joined the basic program staff in 1997 after 10 years of undergraduate teaching at the University of Chicago and the Honors College at Valparaiso University. Clare did her undergraduate and graduate work with the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago, where she worked on the intersections of literature and philosophy, with special attention to the interrelationship of literature and ethics. Clare studied in Germany during graduate school and taught American undergraduates in Germany for 3 years. Clare has published and lectured on Martin Heidegger and given many First Friday lectures on a range of topics and lectured elsewhere in addition to lecturing within the basic program. From 2004 to 2008, Clare chaired the basic program. During that period, she co-designed and then chaired the Asian Classics program, which we have recently rebooted as the Asian Classical Traditions Alumni Sequence. Clare is the 2008 recipient of the Graham School Excellence in Teaching Award for the basic program, and she also teaches in the Humanities and Philosophy Department at Oakton Community College. All right, now let me stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Clare. All right, Claire, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Noah. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I am looking forward to a chance to try once again to synthesize some thoughts on Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov. Some of you who know me will know that I have for ages said it's the greatest novel in the world. Um, it and I've been very gratified lately when teaching it to have students agree by the end of the quarter that they think it's the best novel in the world. Famously, it has been called a novel that includes absolutely everything. One place where that occurs is in Vonnegut, who puts it into a character's mouth, but I suspect it didn't begin with him. It's Dostoevsky's last and most complex novel, and probably, I would be willing to argue, the novel that really represents his fully mature, synthesized effort to put forward his literary account of the problems that he wrestled with throughout his entire career. And so it's an imposing novel in both its length and its richness and complexity. What I want to do today is to focus in, or to try to focus in, on a small piece of it. Dostoevsky's Brothers K is frequently excerpted philosophically by pulling out the Grand Inquisitor chapter. And I have thought always that Dostoevsky is probably rolling over in his grave every time that happens, because what he's really doing in the novel is presenting a counter argument to Ivan's philosophy in the various forms it turns up in, the Grand Inquisitor being one. I don't want to talk about the Grand Inquisitor today. It's talked about in plenty of places. It's focused on intensively enough. What I want to talk about is the chapter that precedes it, which is the chapter titled Rebellion. Rebellion is one of three chapters. It's the middle of a series of three chapters in the early part of the book, in the section where Ivan and Alyosha actually get together and have their first real conversation with each other since they were children. And Ivan dominates this conversation. He's about to leave town, at least until he's 30. He's 24 at this point. And he wants Alyosha to know who his brother is. At least that's what he says. The Rebellion chapter, the second chapter of this section, is, both in my experience of reading the book and my experience of teaching the book, the chapter that readers have the hardest time with, because it's brutal. It is absolutely brutal to read. It's a chapter that beats you over the head and is thoroughly depressing. Dostoevsky doesn't mean simply to beat us over the head, I'm going to argue. He has answers to this, unusual answers to this, that the book exists majorly to put forward. So the Rebellion chapter, broadly speaking, is Ivan's particular take on the classic theological problem of evil. The problem of evil, for those of you who are less familiar with it, and I'm going to stick to a very general summary here because Dostoevsky is doing his own thing with it. It's a traditional take on the problem: if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, how could he possibly have created a world where evil is prevalent and innocent beings suffer through no fault of their own? And there are many philosophical, theological responses to this and versions of it. The traditional responses fall into two categories, and we'll see both of those picked up in a certain sense by Ivan, but modified. The primary response, one of the primary responses, is to deny that the human mind is capable of understanding the mind of God. If we think about Job and the Hebrew tradition of wisdom literature, where God's answer to Job when he questions why he has been made to suffer so greatly despite being a good man and an upright man, with the question, were you with me when I created the universe? Overpowering him then with visions of things that are vastly beyond his experience and understanding. And Job bends at the end of this. And this is a core theological position that exists in Judaism and enters into Christianity through this. We can't understand the mind of God, therefore, evil in the world is a mystery that we have to accept on faith, focusing on other things rather than trying to come to terms with it. The second major response, it concerns the argument that the universe, to be the best possible world, needs to include some being, a created being, who's capable of understanding and appreciating the goodness of the whole and of choosing that goodness for its own sake over the possibilities of self-interest. So this is the free will argument. For this to be possible, there has to be genuine free will. And if there's genuine free will, there has to be a real chance that people will fail in their choices, and seeing the good and knowing it will choose evil instead. So the argument stands that because human beings are capable of better, God does not create a universe that necessarily entails evil, but the primary responsibility for evil falls on human beings. The best of all possible universes is in fact possible, and it depends on us improving our own choices, us becoming better, being better. Now, this second argument doesn't entirely cover all the original areas of the philosophical problem of evil, because the original problem also takes up issues of the suffering of animals. Nature is set up sometimes to function quite brutally, and it takes up the suffering of people through illness and accident and natural disaster, none of which can simply in any way be blamed on human choice. So the default fallback for the traditional answer for this is to combine these two core responses. We can't understand the order of nature and why nature involves this, but we can put primary responsibility for intentional cruelty and evil strictly on human beings, and make the argument that free will justifies the evils that emerge on account of free will. Dostoevsky does some interesting things with this here. First of all, Ivan's version of this problem is not simply the classic problem. It's going to be narrowed and framed in some interesting ways. Ivan's version of this problem is going to admit freely that we can't understand the mind of God. We can't understand the mind of God, but for Ivan, this will raise a serious problem in and of itself, because if we're talking about good and evil, if we're talking about morality and moral choice, then creating a universe where morality is so complex and incomprehensible that we don't understand it, and that the order of the universe runs counter to our fundamental moral impulses and understanding and needs, is itself a problem. Ivan will argue this. Our, what he calls Euclidean minds, when it comes to ideas of morality and justice, have a claim to being satisfied as they are. And not to being put off with, well, you don't really understand good and evil. The argument that we don't understand good and evil could be seen as undermining the very claim that it's critical to have a being in the universe who, through free will, knows the good and chooses the good for its own sake. So he's getting tricky with us there. Ivan will also attempt to, he argues that he will accept, in a certain sense, the traditional arguments, but nevertheless is unsatisfied. And in explaining why he's unsatisfied and what the response to this dissatisfaction is, he will restrict the argument to what he thinks of as the plainest instances of evil in the world. He will restrict the argument to stories of the abuse and the torturous abuse, not just abuse, but the torturous abuse of innocent children. He's talking here primarily children, as he will point out, under the age of 7, which he believes is an argument that prevents us from accepting the theological underpinnings of a divine good world. We can't accept it on these terms. And Ivan, who is primarily presented to us as someone who is adept at philosophy and inclined to philosophy and philosophical thinking, is going to present his arguments as sophisticated philosophical arguments. This argument and the one that follows it, where we're not going in the Grand Inquisitor. He's a philosopher primarily. Dostoevsky, on the other hand, is not going to directly respond to Ivan's philosophical arguments with philosophy. And he won't simply pick up the philosophical arguments, the theological and philosophical arguments in the history of tradition to try to refute Ivan. Dostoevsky sees this issue in a very different light. In his work, throughout his novel writing, throughout his work, he presents us with questions of good and evil and questions of human moral action as guided by emotion and resting in direct personal experience and action, rather than as capable of being studied and understood and argued in philosophical terms. Philosophy for Dostoevsky, although he's a very adept philosopher and he frequently gives very impressive philosophical arguments to the side that he wishes to refute, philosophy cannot properly comprehend and address any kind of moral issue. What philosophy ends up doing is actually undermining morality. This is an important point for Dostoevsky. One of his major concerns here with the views of the late 19th century around him in Russia is the degree to which Enlightenment thinking, philosophical Enlightenment thinking, and with that, an optimism about the ability of reason and rational systems to fix the world and to address all the problems that humanity faces have to some degree taken over. It's optimism. It's a move that fixes, that genuinely does help address many traditional forms of systemic evil. But if reason cannot adequately deal with the genuine sources of our humanity, and in particular our ethical humanity, because they are not rooted in reason, then the more we focus on systematic thinking and rational systems, political systems, economic systems, social systems, whatever kind of systems that we have that are going to cure the overall problems, the further we get away from actually experiencing and dealing with the overall problems in a way that has any hope of orienting us in the right direction. So Dostoevsky is pitting here, as he does elsewhere, rationality with conscience, with an emotional, grounded experience of conscience and human relationship. What this means for the novel is that instead of giving us direct counter arguments, he's going to give us visions and stories. He's going to give us individual characters whose individual experiences of what they're going through demonstrate why Ivan's arguments are wrong, demonstrate why his cynical rejection of the world is wrong, and even why his rejection of the world that claims to have moral outrage as its motivating stand is a kind of perverse twist on what is actually happening, and a perverse twist that we can understand as ultimately leading him down paths that make him co-responsible for his father's murder and nearly tear him apart in trying to confront and make sense of that responsibility, which he feels but doesn't believe in. So ultimately, Dostoevsky sees this as the problem of evil is not the problem of why a good God could create a world that contains evil. It's not the problem of how we can make sense of or fix evil in the world. It is the problem of how personally, on an individual level, dealing with the people around us, we can deal purposely with intentional and willing cruelty, especially when the people who are choosing to act cruelly get away from it, and they appear to suffer no clear consequences. This is morally outraging. There's no question that this is morally outraging. And it is horrifying to all of us. It's also a feature of the world. So we take up the question, does this kind of evil invalidate morality and the possibility of understanding life in the world as actually something good? This is Ivan's argument. Yes, it invalidates it. Dostoevsky's more concerned with the question of how do we live in such a world where we seem to be surrounded with brutality, with willful brutality, and with no clear consequences for it. How do we emerge from the paralyzing depression, you might say, that overcomes people in the face of that? The need to say no to it, while simultaneously, as reason itself tells us, our power is so limited that we can't exactly change it, and the systems we put in place to change it don't actually work. So with that in mind, let's turn to what Dostoevsky is doing with the character of Ivan and what he does in this chapter, Rebellion. I want to point first to some immediate context, because Dostoevsky's refutation of Ivan's philosophical arguments turn up in multiple thematic echoes throughout the entire book. He gives us answers of a sort. He gives us the ground of answers for a sort in almost every part of the novel. So there are clues that he will plant in the argument itself that Ivan makes, and in the lead up to the argument. What's Ivan's state of mind? What's going on around this? What is he feeling? What is the effect of this on him? Why is he doing this? So we look particularly into his particular situation, the character and motivations for making the universal claims that he makes and taking the stance that he takes. At the same time, what I'm going to suggest is that in addition to having certain thematic issues brought up in the novel and demonstrated in the novel, the particular decision that Ivan makes to focus on children, the suffering of children, and the cruelty toward children, is something that Dostoevsky chooses to respond directly to with a part of the novel that, very often, especially with first-time readers, seems to a lot of people is rather peripheral to the plot. And I'm talking here about the whole narrative of the schoolboys and Alyosha's relation to the schoolboys. We have the murder and the murder mystery and the trial going on around us. We have the crises that are arising out of Dmitri's situation and Ivan's situation and Smerdyakov and the mess that Fyodor causes and how everybody reacts to it. What doesn't seem immediately to play in directly is what these children have to do with it. And so while we are worrying about these pressing issues in the book, we're taking long sections of the book to see how Alyosha is interacting with this group of schoolboys. And so what I'm going to argue here is that Alyosha's relationship with the schoolboys as he directly develops it, and his characterization of what's going on with these children and how they respond to various actions coming at them from the outside, not just through Alyosha, but Dmitri is essential here. Smerdyakov is critical here. Rakitin is critical here. Their general reaction to the outside world and what we see happening through these responses gives us also a particularly direct response to the issue of the suffering of children. So let's take a look, if we can, at the specific argument Ivan makes. Hang on just a second, because I'm talking from notes here, and my notes have a tendency to go astray. Well, I'll leave them astray at the moment and just move on. So if we look at the rebellion chapter, before we dig into rebellion, we have had a series of dramatic events take place. Immediately before this, we have seen Ivan have a blow up with Katerina Ivanovna. Ivan, who we are told over and over again is in love with Katerina, who supposedly is in love with Dmitri, who is having this tempestuous relationship with Dmitri that we've gotten the dirty details of, and that is in crisis because of Dmitri's attraction to Grushenka. We have this remarkable scene where Ivan, who has stood on the sidelines, supporting Katerina in ways that we're told about but don't directly see, for a good month, finally blows up at her. Katerina is driven to major frustration by Dmitri's infidelity here, by Dmitri's love for Grushenka, and by the fact that when she tries to manipulate Grushenka, Grushenka manages to stick the knife in and humiliate her. And she pronounces that she will stick with Dmitri to her dying day, even if he doesn't love her, even when she runs off with Grushenka, because he needs to understand how self-sacrificing she is for him. And in a moment of emotion and rare honesty, she actually says, he'll eventually come round, he'll see, I will be a god to whom he must pray. Her fidelity will break him emotionally, and she will finally get her due. And Ivan's reaction to that is to just lay into her for the first time ever. This is a scene of truth-telling. And he tells her that she doesn't love Dmitri. She is in love with her own virtue. She desperately needs to overcome the shame that she has in her past, and especially that started her relationship with Dmitri, by proving to him that she's completely virtuous and better than he is. And she is engaged in torturing Dmitri, herself, and Ivan in order to prove her goodness, to stand above everyone morally. And Ivan's had enough. He breaks with her at that point. He's done with her. He confesses that he has loved her, but he's done with her, and he won't stick around for the torture, and he leaves. This leads us quickly. This is the immediate precedent to his first long meeting with Alyosha. So what we see at first in this meeting with Alyosha is Ivan turning around and giving us the opposite of what appeared to be truth in the preceding scene. He tells Alyosha, first of all, that he loved her, but then, would you believe it? I find out I never loved her. I didn't love her after all. And he announces himself as taking leave of the world. The world is not worth living in. The world contains no real goodness. And the only thing that is going to keep him from killing himself in the face of the bleak emptiness, the bleak moral emptiness of the world, is that he can't help but love the world, love nature, and love many people without having any understanding of why he loves it. So that love for life will keep him alive for a while, but then he says, but maybe not past 30. By 30, everything will be too jaded. By 30, there are too many dangers of turning into Fyodor and falling down a path of simple vice and cruelty. And so we're led to believe that he's going to say goodbye to it all by the time he's 30. In the meantime, though, one of the things that characterizes his first major reunion with Alyosha, who he's been watching from afar for an entire month, is that he remembers him as a child. He has affection for him. He's remembered that he loves cherry jam and various little details about him. He wants to be nice to him. And at the same time, Alyosha, looking at him, says, what strikes me is you're still a little boy. You still have that child inside you. So as they reunite, they're seeing each other as adults who never left the child behind. And Dostoevsky invites us regularly to recognize that as adults, we never fully grow up. The child that we are is always still in us in this childlike way. This is even true for some of the worst characters. And here I'm thinking about Fyodor. Fyodor is unquestionably monstrous. He's pathological. He needs to tear things down. He needs to be nasty. He needs to humiliate people. And we're told that his relationship to his wives has everything to do, especially his second wife, Ivan and Alyosha's mother, who is pure and innocent. When he sees innocence, he has a pathological need to destroy it, cruelly to destroy it. So he's our first monstrous example, or our first example of a monstrous adult. And yet we're told that he wakes up in the middle of the night sometimes terrified and lost. And it's Grigory who is simply kind and faithful to him. He calls for Grigory in the middle of the night and asks him irrelevant questions, and just the presence of a decent person who's willing to be there for him comforts him. He needs that human comfort of absolutely everything that he's in the process of destroying during his waking hours. And he can't manage without it. So we have that little twist on him, like a child with a nightmare. He wakes up and needs to be comforted out of the nightmare that he's created of his own life. And he finds that comfort. He also finds a level of it in Alyosha. So we have that aspect to it. Um, this is important ultimately in the course of the novel, because um, it turns out that we have this tendency, and Ivan will play this out very explicitly. We have this tendency looking at adults when they do something that is offensive, whether it's just personally offensive to us or whether it is really violating, to assume that there is no possible justification for this, that there is no way that this could be comprehensible to anybody, and that they deserve the worst harm on themselves for this. You cannot take them seriously. You cannot do anything with them. They are hopelessly and completely evil. So we have a tendency to exert this judgment over adults that we don't have over children. When Ivan does set up the question of the suffering of children, he specifies that he's going to start with children because children are not like adults, at least when they're under 7. They haven't come into the full capacity for moral reasoning, and therefore we can't hold them responsible for bad choices that they make. We have to see them as innocent victims. And as innocent victims, we have to be outraged at any harm that is done to them and any suffering that is done to them. So Ivan draws a hard line between adults and children in the terms of morality and the moral framework that attaches to them. Dostoevsky is going to some degree, blur this line a little bit. Not in such a way as ever to justify the evil that gets done. He doesn't try to justify it in any sense, either the evil that is done by adults to other adults or the evil that is done to children. But he does try from the outset to cast some doubts on the clear and distinct categories that we apply to people and how we then create these rational judgments of them by presuming that we know exactly who and what they are, and we can make these hard and fast distinctions. When we go back to this precedent issue of Ivan and Katerina, There are a couple of things that we should note about Katerina's behavior and then about Ivan's behavior too. Ivan accuses Katerina of lying to herself and acting a part. This is another piece that's thematic in the novel. And acting the part of a dedicated, virtuous victim in order to lie to herself and protect herself from her own feelings of shame. This is something that Zosima, the monk, points out to Fyodor when Fyodor is in their initial family meeting in the monastery. Fyodor is shown to us as pathologically driven by shame. I don't know to what extent they had a psychology of narcissism in 1880 when the novel is published, but Dostoevsky certainly worked out his own understanding of the psychological mechanisms of narcissistic action. And Fyodor is nothing if not a narcissist. Fyodor is shown to us as constantly compensating for his feeling of being less than and looked down on people because he, as an aristocrat, is down and out, relatively down and out. He takes on the form, before he earns money, he takes on the form of a man who sponges on other people's hospitality by being invited to dinner parties that he can't afford to reciprocate, when he can't even really afford to feed himself or be a part of that company. And he's invited to dinner parties because he is sharp and has a good wit. But the wit then sharpens itself considerably into the ability to humiliate others and attack them. Whenever he feels ashamed, we see him directly find ways to mock and attack the people he feels ashamed in front of and to tear them apart. And this is something that Zosima immediately notes. And Zosima says to him, he points out not only that the root is in shame, but he says to him, above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth in him, within him or around him, and so he loses all respect for both himself and others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. So Fyodor's character here is our beginning definitional character, someone who, because of shame, lies to himself to avoid his feelings of shame, loses respect for everybody and himself, and therefore becomes incapable of love. Katerina turns into another model, another character on this same model, and Ivan is to some degree on the same trajectory. Ivan is pulled in between these things. The reason I say Ivan is on the same trajectory is that before we get to the rebellion chapter, we see Ivan reversing himself. Is he lying to himself? Is he not lying to himself? Is he capable of love or is he not capable of love? He's flip-flopping back and forth on these issues. He doesn't seem to have totally settled in one direction or the other. But when we get into the two chapters that become Rebellion and the Grand Inquisitor, we watch him move from his interaction with Alyosha, which is very human, to being increasingly trapped in his own self-serving and self-deceptive narrative. He's trying, in a certain sense, to convince Alyosha that this is the way the world is. And what he does is gradually move himself from a kind of humanized position where he has to admit to loving people and loving the world. And he seems better than he has before, to a standpoint whereby at the end of the discussion with Alyosha and at the end of his 2 long arguments, he walks off like a man possessed and immediately implicates himself with Smerdyakov in the murder of his father, as if he has no free will and no ability to resist it. So he's convinced himself here through these chapters. And this is also thematic. To what degree do we deceive ourselves into the ability to pass judgment on everyone else and exempt ourselves from our own moral obligations here? This is the direction that he moves with this. So the first direct piece of the Rebellion chapter is a little prologue. This is, Ivan starts with a story of John the Merciful. This is actually a story from Flaubert, who, in Flaubert, the name is actually Julian the Merciful, and this is the story of a man who finds a beggar who is half frozen to death and who is suffering from disease and is nearly dead. And he warms him up using the heat of his own body, and he gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to revive him from the verge of death, and he brings him back to life. Ivan, giving Julian the Merciful the Western version of his own name, John the Merciful, and this becomes important later in the book, builds an argument that says Christ-like love for human beings, which John the Merciful is supposed to be exemplifying here, is a miracle impossible on earth. When you see people actually act in such ways, it has to be acting, not sincere, honest choice, not love, but an attempt to display one's own superiority and goodness, or else a kind of perverse self-punishment. It's not real, it's not true, it's not motivated by compassion. And so he highlights that before going into his long argument about the problem of evil. This is another aspect that Dostoevsky uses to set up the overall problem with. This echoes a scene between Madame Koklakov and Father Zosima, where she wants to be a humanitarian, but she doesn't think she can really do it because actually her neighbors irritate her, and many of them would be ungrateful, and she couldn't bring herself, if they're not nice to her and appreciative of what she does, to actually be nice to them. And Zosima has a direct response to this, which is, yeah, you want people to admire you, you're motivated by the wrong reasons, but there's a cure for this. Simply be kind to the people around you without looking for anything, and if it irritates you, do it in small doses and see where that takes you. It might, he doesn't promise, but it might make things better. It might gradually affect how you see people and interact with them. So we have that hanging in the background, that if you want love for your neighbor, decency toward other human beings, despite their irritating qualities, to be something that you're capable of, there's a philosophy of, when it's in front of your nose, do it, whether you like it or not, which we will see examples of, although not directly in Ivan or directly in a number of the characters, certainly not in Madame Koklakov. So we have this framework, and one of the things that Ivan does with this framework is also to set up this idea that one of the reasons that we can't love other people is that we need to feel superior to them. We want to maintain our own feelings that we're better than them. His direct argument is that we can't accept in them any suffering that doesn't humiliate them. If their suffering humiliates them, sure, we can be nice to them. If they have a suffering that is undeserved and not humiliating, we don't want to acknowledge it because it interferes with our ability to feel superior. So he has set that up from the beginning. I'm going to move us into Dostoevsky's unwieldy. So I'm going to move us into the direct argument of the rebellion chapter. In the rebellion chapter, which I think is something that Dostoevsky spent a lot of time personally dealing with and wrestling with over the course of his life. And I say that because Ivan will use a small group of stories about the abuse of children. And these are stories that are true stories. Dostoevsky kept a notebook of newspaper clippings about the abuse of children. And he gathered them together as something that he wanted to be able to use indisputably true instances in his work. So Ivan is dealing with predominantly 4 instances here. The first one is, and I'm not going to go into detail because they're gruesome, quite honestly. I'll give you a little bit of the framework, but we don't need to beat our heads against the wall on this. The first story is a story that he's gotten of Turkish soldiers during the war who tease and play with a baby who's in her mother's arms, only to, the minute the baby smiles, take that baby and murder it in front of the mother. And this is his opening volley. This is the setup of his argument. He interrupts his argument at this point with the remark that if the devil did not exist and man has therefore created him, he has created him in his own image and likeness. Now, this is another important remark that's thematic. Earlier, we've seen Fyodor playing with the idea that God doesn't exist and man created him in his own image and likeness, and of course, quoting the famous argument to that respect. If we're cast back on what Zosima has to say about this, Zosima's definition of God is the capacity to love. The capacity to love the world, the capacity to love other people, the capacity to put down one's self-love and arrogance in order to actually be with other people in a caring, respectful way. And his definition of hell is the inability to love. So by making this remark about the devil doesn't exist and man has created him, he's in his own image and likeness, in a certain sense, Ivan is evoking this question of the ability to love or the inability to love, and what it is and where it comes from. So I just want to throw that out there. After that brief interruption, he turns to a story that I think is less important. It's a critique of what he thinks of as performative Christianity. There's a child who is sold into slavery as a child. He's treated as a slave. He's not fed. He's not cared for. He grows up to become a criminal and is converted to Christianity in jail. And the performative Christianity that Ivan mocks here, and I think Dostoevsky with him, is that when they convert him and tell him he's now their brother in Christ, they don't object to him being put to death for his crime. They simply stand by him at the execution. And they see no contradiction in that. So Dostoevsky has a problem with that. Ivan represents it as perverse hypocrisy, as a form of acting out one's Christianity as a lie. After this, he moves toward what are his two most critical stories, which are the story of a young child who is not fully potty trained and makes a mess of her bed at night, and who is punished by the parents by being smeared in her own feces and left for the entire night in a dark outhouse. And the parents are later brought up on charges, but Ivan presents this in vivid detail in all its horror as an unforgivable form of torture of an absolutely innocent child. And he follows it up with a second one, which is the story of an old general who's an aristocrat who owns an estate and loves to hunt, and he's senile at this point. And it's not going to matter to Ivan that he's senile at this point. He doesn't fully understand what's going on around him. And there is a peasant or a serf on his estate, a young boy, who throws a stone at one of his favorite hunting dogs. And his response to the stone throwing is to set the hounds on the boy and have them tear him to death. Those two are the critical examples that he wants to put forward. He asks Alyosha at this point, what should this man suffer? Should he be shot for our moral satisfaction? And Alyosha, with trepidation, says he should be shot. And Ivan feels like he's triumphed, although Alyosha says, no, that's absurd. But Ivan says, no, no buts. We're going forward here. He should be shot. The next piece of the argument that ties it all together is that there is no way that this kind of cruelty to children can be forgiven. What we're dealing with here is the kind of evil that under any moral system is simply unforgivable. So Ivan says, when I see that, I want retribution. And I want to see the retribution, because if I don't see the retribution, it violates my fundamental sense of the morality of the world. But there's a problem with that, because what good is retribution going to do? Punishing the offender does not undo the horrible suffering of the innocent victim. Punishment gets us nowhere. And the same thing with the idea of punishment in some kind of hell. Eternal damnation itself violates moral reasoning. Finite crimes shouldn't have eternal damnation, and it doesn't reverse the harm that is done. So maybe forgiveness is the answer. Maybe the idea that there will be an ultimate overcoming of human evil in the world and an ultimate reconciliation and forgiveness of it all that we as human beings don't yet understand, but we will get. That's not going to work for him either. And the argument is, take the mother of the child who has been torn apart by the hounds. Can she forgive the landowner who did it? He says she might forgive him for her suffering, but she has no right to forgive him for the child's suffering. And that extends, he's going to argue, even to God. It's an unforgivable suffering. By way of further evidence for this, he starts off the next chapter with a medieval story where the Virgin Mary goes to visit hell and has pity on the suffering of all the people in hell and tries to convince God to get rid of hell and forgive them all. And God points to Christ's wounds and says, how can I forgive his torturer? And he refuses to get rid of hell, although he does give them one day a year where they have relief. So it's a slight compromise. Ivan's standpoint here is that the only thing that you can do in the face of this is reject the world. If you are going to have moral consistency, if you are going to have any hope that morality means anything in the world, you have to simply reject the world. And then again, he turns to Alyosha again and says to him, if you were tasked with creating the best of all possible universes, and in order to build it, you had to build it on the suffering of just one innocent child, would you do it? And Alyosha says no. So Ivan at this point thinks that he has an ironclad argument. And we don't get any attempt to directly refute this anywhere. What we get from this is the constant stress that philosophical arguments like this are usually rationalizations and self-serving. Ivan himself talks himself into further and further depression, but also a kind of sense of heroic superiority. He's modeling the figure of Satan in his rebellion against the universe here, in his claim that the good way is to reject the whole order of the universe, and is creating for himself this romanticization of rebellion, arguably. What Dostoevsky gives us is instead this argument that when we see evil when we think about evil, when we think about why people do what they do and what our relationship to it is, we give ourselves too much credit and we give other people too little credit. We rationalize our own position. We convince ourselves that we are powerless because, from the standpoint of reason and systems, what good can we do in the face of the horrors of the world? We can't fix the problem. We are tiny. The problem is big. This is delusional and self-serving. It allows us to avoid taking any responsibility or dealing with doing action that we might rather not do. The answer that he gives us is, how do we act in the face of actual suffering under our noses? How do we act when there is actual wrong immediately under our noses? And we get two sides of this. One is when we see someone who has done wrong, do we put ourselves above them and judge them and condemn them and shame them? Or do we treat them still as a human being and at least open up the possibility of them confronting themselves, which is only possible when they are not shamed. The second part of this is when we see someone who's suffering, do we actually take action to make it better? Do we do whatever we can, however small it is, to improve the situation? And this is what takes us to the story of the boys. What we get in the story of the boys is three examples here. The two boys who are central here are Ilyusha and Kolya. And both of these boys have been seriously harmed by an adult in the story. Ilyusha has been harmed when Dmitri, in a rage, publicly humiliates and beats his father and gets his father fired from his job. So his father is the father of a poor family with a sick wife and a sick daughter and a small boy. is in a horrible situation at this point. But more than that, Ilyusha's position is to feel horrified and suffer at his father's humiliation and to want to defend him. And in trying to defend him, and the schoolboys around him imitate the adults around them. They mock him. They make a joke of him. They taunt him. And Ilyusha immediately takes the position of dealing with his hurt with violence. When we meet him, he has stabbed another boy, Kolya Krasotkin. He's involved in a rock fight with the rest of the boys. When Alyosha tries to talk to him, he throws a rock at him and hits him. And then he bites his finger and bites it badly. What do we do with this child? Alyosha doesn't say, this kid's got a problem. What he does say, uncharacteristically for almost every living human being, is, why are you doing this? I must have done something to harm you, or you wouldn't attack me like this. Tell me what I've done. At which point Ilyusha feels ashamed and runs away, and Alyosha has to find out what he has done, how he is involved from elsewhere. And he learns about Dmitri's complicity. So Ilyusha is seriously harmed by Dmitri, and it's harm that spreads. Alyosha is harmed by Dmitri. He gets bitten and hit by rocks from Dmitri's spreading harm. The children are harmed in imitating the shaming of the father and being led into attacking this poor suffering kid. And so we have harm being done on all kinds of levels. We have Kolya. Kolya is an important kid because Kolya is the image of young Ivan. He's precocious, he's smart, he's uncomfortable with his emotions. He doesn't like all that sentimental stuff, and he avoids his emotions. He's proud, and he likes people to admire him, and he's willing to put himself out to do crazy things to get admired. He's a reader. Kolya has been targeted by Rakitin. Rakitin has been trying to create a follower in him and is feeding him nihilistic philosophy that Kolya at 14 is nowhere ready to think through and confront, but he's so proud, he's precociously smart, and he's so proud he pretends to understand it. He needs to have people think that he's brilliant, so he adopts these nihilistic positions without understanding them. And arguably, this actually plays into the developing bad psychology in Kolya. And Kolya is someone who lords it over everybody. He treats Ilyusha badly in that when Ilyusha is suffering because he confesses he's done something terrible, Kolya decides instead of helping him to teach him a lesson. It's this kind of attitude there. So Rakitin is trouble here. He's come in and caused cascading harm in various ways. Kolya actually, when he walks through town, he humiliates and abuses the peasants as a joke. He doesn't mean it meanly, but it's mean. So he's walking down that road. The third character who's implicated is Smerdyakov, who has been teaching the boys in town the trick of embedding a pin in a piece of bread and throwing it to the dogs. And Kolya has done this at Smerdyakov's, not Kolya, I'm sorry, Ilyusha has done this at Smerdyakov's incitement. And when he sees immediately the pain the dog is in as it yelps and runs away, he's stricken with guilt, and he desperately tries to find and save the dog, and he can't find him. His guilt here is part of what drives his violence to the other kids. It also drives him to be so emotionally torn up that when he gets sick, he is in such a bad state of mind that we're led to believe that it impairs his ability to heal. And in the intervening month or so, he actually dies. And so we get this problem that comes up, that these kids are being harmed by ill-intentioned adults around them. What do we do with that? We start with a chaotic situation where they're at each other's throats and they're headed down roads where their personal decisions are pretty bad. And the idea that Dostoevsky consistently gives us is, as you age, the more horrible things you do, the more stuck you get. You can climb up the ladder, but you can't climb back down. So the children are important in this way.
Claire, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. We just wanted to let you know we only have 5 minutes
Oh my
left
God. I'm sorry.
so it's
I'm sorry.
1:25.
Not watching the clock there. Just wrapping up. Alyosha's response to them is to do what Zosima suggests. He talks to them. He can't fix things for them. These are problems that he can't fix. What he can do is treat them with kindness and respect, listen to them, not shame them, and be a catalyst for building a community there which is actually considerate and respectful and becomes something that has the possibility, as they grow, once Ilyusha dies, he has his speech at the stone there, develops the possibility through good memories of decent, close relationships with other people and real friendships, develops the possibility that when bad things come their way, they will find the resources in themselves to resist. As Dmitri does when he's tempted to kill his father, but he's pulled away at the last minute and doesn't. So Dostoevsky is giving us a very complex answer that's rooted in the idea that the little bit that we can do, which seems like nothing, by actually treating other people with decency in the face of suffering and horror, can have world-changing effects, potentially. It's an encouraging message at the end, although it's complicated and perhaps hard for, it's a hard one to follow. So I'm going to wrap up with that, with apologies for letting the unwieldy subject pull me over time. Let me stop there and take questions if you have any.
Not to worry, we'll blame Dostoevsky, not you, Claire. This is a obviously voluminous topic, and I'm sure there's much, much more to say about it.
I thought I was reducing it, but not fully successfully.
Well, there's a lot to reduce.
Yeah.
I think we have time probably for one question, which means that I've got a difficult decision, which is to choose. So I'm going to ask you a question from Bradley Underwood.
Okay.
If Dostoevsky effectively says that Christianity does not give you a good explanation so much as a way to respond well to evil, or put differently, if God doesn't give you an explanation of evil so much as God's own presence, for instance, Christ or the Ark of the Covenant, then wouldn't Christianity be a kind of opium, unnecessary illusion?
Dostoevsky's ultimate answer is no, because it's not the theology that matters here. And I know this is potentially a provocative and radical thing to say about Dostoevsky, but I think what he is pushing here is not an idea of the theological idea of God so much as it is the sense that our humanity, for ourselves and our own happiness, as well as for the larger world, rests in the moral imperative to treat other people with humility and kindness, which gets summed up really in the metaphor of giving an onion. We do small acts of kindness. That's the direct response to our trouble with the world. we deal not with the generality of the world or the generality of religion, but how can I make this better right here and right now? It ultimately has a deep resonance with Buddhist prescriptions. You know, don't think about the big picture. What are you called on to do at the moment, and how does that make things whole again at the moment? So sorry not to give time to the discussion. I was looking forward to the discussion, actually.
That's all right. I suppose your email address is out there. People can send you
Yeah.
questions if they like
You
later.
can't cheat and take another question.
Well, people could at least, I don't think it's cheating, but they could sign up for your courses in the future on this subject. But no, I'm afraid we have to end the event. So I'm going to end with our tradition for these events, which is we're going to all pretend that we're in an auditorium. I'm going to ask you all to unmute, and we will thank Claire with our hands and our voices. So here we go.
Yay.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much.
Claire, may I ask a quick question?
Sure.
What you said at the very end reminded me a bit of the idea of process theology. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It has some relation, I think.
It has what?
It has some relation to it in some ways, yeah.
Yes, so that every little bit of good that we do furthers the process of good in the world.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's all I wanted to know, was whether you saw that relationship there or not. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there are so many interesting relations here. It's I tend to get overwhelmed by the amount of them that there are.
Indeed.
All right, I
Indeed.
suppose we did sneak in an extra question. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you again at another First Friday.
Noah,
Thank you to Claire.
before you
Stop her.
close us,